In our recent videos, we've talked about processors. We focused mainly on ARM-based processors and processors that use the ARM ISA, their advantages, disadvantages, and basically how they work. Well, what about Intel? Don't they make processors as well? That's what we're going to talk about on today's episode of the Android Guy Weekly. Today's question comes to us from Pratik. I assume he's in India. I hope he is, because if so, he's got kind of an advantage over us in America and other countries, but I'll get to that in just a minute. He wants to know specifically about Intel and why we haven't seen many Intel architecture-based Androids. Well, the answer to that is relatively simple. You see, Intel is a CISC-based architecture. All of their chips, and I know saying all is going to get me in trouble, but for the most part, their chips are all complex instruction set computing, or CISC. Now, there are several different kinds of CISC processors. That complicates things a little bit more. Everything that we've been talking about up to now has been RISC-based processors, reduced instruction set computing. Now, just a little recap. You can run things through a processor faster if you've got a simpler instruction set. So if you reduce that instruction set, you get better speeds. Unfortunately, that means you've got to do some reducing of the instructions that you're sending through the processor up front. That's either done on the fly, or that's done by pre-compiling. Well, if it's pre-compiling, that's not going to take the end user any more time, but if it's done on the fly, obviously that's going to take up some time as well. And it really becomes kind of a catch-22. Intel's sticking with the CISC. It's what they do best. Now, can we run Android on a CISC-based system? Yeah, we can. Unfortunately, it does have to be a custom compilation to run on the different architecture. In fact, if we want to take a page from history, Microsoft was doing this with Windows Mobile, back before it was called Windows Mobile. There were several different types of processors that you could run on. Now, they weren't CISC versus RISC, they were RISC versus RISC, but they were different processors. They had different instruction sets. Because of that, all of your apps had to be custom compiled to run on the different architecture, including the operating system. Android has an advantage over that. Yes, you do have to have a different compilation, I think that last one was it, of the operating system. That's not a problem because, you know, it comes pre-installed on your hardware. So if you're going to have Intel hardware, you're going to have a custom-built Android operating system that runs on that. But then we get back to the question of apps. Will these apps need to be recompiled to run on a CISC-based architecture? Luckily, with Android, the answer is no. You don't have to do that. Why? Because Android apps all run in virtual machines. Now, that means the VM that they're running in has to be recompiled to run in a different architecture. But once that virtual machine is recompiled, all of the old apps will run in it just fine. That's one of the beauties of Java. That's what we learned about Java. Now, I know we're not talking Java, Oracle Java, Sun Java. We're talking Google Java. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, just look up the Oracle versus Google Java lawsuit. It's a pain in the neck. But that's one of the advantages of that metaphor, shall we say, so we don't get into any trouble with some patent lawyers, Oracle. What you do is you write once, and you can run anywhere. But not quite anywhere. We run into another problem. You see, that VM really hasn't kept up with all of the hardware advantages that, well, are coming down the line. You see, these systems on a chip come with a built-in GPU and some other bells and whistles. Those GPUs have a lot of power. They can really accelerate your graphics, but you have to be able to take advantage of that. In the traditional desktop, laptop code writing, if you will, you write to a specific graphics driver. And since there are only 2 or 3 out there in the desktop world, you have these people that are writing a game, let's say, and they write it for AMD, or they write it for NVIDIA, or they write it for whomever, right? But they're plugging into specific APIs in the graphics driver itself. We don't want to do that with mobile. We don't want to do that in this write once, run anywhere metaphor, but people are doing that. You can, and that kind of runs into problems. There's usually a fallback to say, hey, if you're running one of these super high-end GPUs, great, do this. And it's accelerated and it's buttery smooth and it looks nice, the graphics are amazing, but if not, fall back and you get basic stuff. Which is a shame because some of these processors have high-end GPUs married with them. They just don't have custom written code in all those apps to talk to them, which is then further complicated by switching over from a RISC to a CISC-based architecture. You with me so far? Okay. So where are we at with Intel? Well, there are some distros of Android that you can get that will run on your desktop-based Android OS, or desktop OS. You can run Android right there. Now, I've got an x86 processor which runs x64 instructions. What does that mean? I can run 32-bit or 64-bit apps or programs on my desktop computer. It's great. Well, the whole i86 platform is kind of interesting, and with mobile processors, particularly the Intel Atom processor, Intel didn't go that route. There's a different instruction set. It's called i32. Guys, correct me here with this one, okay? It's essentially a mobile-based instruction set. It's simpler. It's 32-bit. It's not going to run your 64-bit stuff, unfortunately. That means it's going to be a little bit slower than if you had that full bandwidth of a 64-bit pipe. The ARM stuff, to the best of my knowledge, is all 32-bit, so we're still staying with, can I say apples to apples, or will you guys get mad at me for that? Anyway, it's still the same architecture, just different. Thoroughly confused? Okay. Are there any phones or tablets out there that can run this stuff? That's where Pratik might be lucky. If he's in India, and I think he probably is, there is a phone that you can get that is available in India. It costs about 420 bucks US, but it is an Intel Atom-based phone. It's supposed to be really, really nice. Battery life is supposed to be amazing. It's called the Xolo, X-O-L-O, and essentially it proves it can be done, and it can be done well. We just haven't quite seen an Intel-based smartphone over here in the States yet, and I suspect we'll probably start out with an Intel-based tablet before we see an Intel-based smartphone. Does that answer everybody's questions? i86, i64, 32, Intel Atom, wow, lots and lots of stuff. Now, we specifically didn't go into the Atom-based architecture because there are many of them, different platforms. You can even run some Atom stuff inside a desktop PC, but special motherboard, special socket, special all that fun stuff. That's why it's best when it's a system on a chip, which the later Atom-based processors are. They're not just a processor, they're an entire SoC. Again, not going too much into that, but know that they've kind of crossed the bridge from desktop, laptop computing into mobile computing by adding the whole SoC architecture, which they really didn't have before. If you've got some comments that you want to add to the discussion or the topic on this, make sure you leave some comments for us over at PocketNow.com. For PocketNow and the Android Guy Weekly, I'm Joe Levi.